Okay. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you call in from. My name is Gitte Frausing, and I had the privilege of co-chairing the European Computational Science Symposium that we had on June 19th and 20th. So I will give you some highlights of what happened, and I will pass on the microphone to some of the working group leads that will tell you a little bit more in detail about their accomplishments and what happened during the conference. So I guess my job is the easy one. I give you the highlights here, and there were so many highlights, so it was hard to choose. We had not one but two distinguished keynote speakers. So we had Crystal Allard from FDA, Office of Computational Science, to come and talk to us how the PhUSE collaborations are assisting the regulatory review. And we had Dr. Trish Groves that came to us and talked about why data sharing from clinical trials matters. And I have to say those were really good presentations. So thinking about Crystal's presentation, she gave her presentation from the viewpoint of the FDA process and how this all comes together at FDA. And I was surprised, and I think Crystal was also a bit surprised about all the work that's out there from PhUSE and how, and the ongoing work as well. All the deliverables and how broad utility it really has within FDA, from the early beginning to the very end of the FDA review process. There were PhUSE deliverables fitting in everywhere in the FDA process. And it was just really motivational to hear her presentation and see all the work that we're doing here in PhUSE, how it is applied in real life and within the agency. It was totally awesome. So Crystal was finding it hard to list all the PhUSE deliverables. So she actually had to pick. It was hard to fit them all into one presentation. It was quite tremendous. And Dr. Trish Groves' presentation about sharing data, she came to us from a sort of medical and ethical point of view of why it's important and we need to consider data sharing. And it was very thought-provoking for me to hear her presentation, and also the viewpoint from where the journals, such as the British Medical Journal, can assist in this concept of sharing and obligating companies to sharing clinical trial data. So really, truly, two very good keynote presentations we had. And that sort of kicked our entire conference and working meeting, which it really was, to its beginning. So after the keynote presentations, we had 3 working groups or projects that went into their separate streams and started working on identified topics that they thought would be useful to discuss. So you'll hear more about this from the individual co-leads later on. This is really just the highlights, but we had 3 working groups meet non-clinical topics. There was a lot of sharing of information between vendors, industry, regulators. It was just tremendous. The data transparency, they were discussing the de-identification challenges and policy 0070. They had EMA representatives present as part of their working group and had the EMA viewpoint. And we also had a panel session at the end of the conference where the EMA representatives continued to receive questions and discuss the EMA viewpoints on all of this. So that was truly awesome as well. And the optimizing use of data standards, they actually addressed quite many topics. They split into smaller working groups within the working group, and it was a huge success because everyone were able to contribute. So all the newbies and newcomers to this thing, they were not able to sit quietly in a corner and just listen in. Everybody just rolled up their sleeves in the smaller working groups and contributed, which was also a tremendous success. So overall, really amazing. And I wanted to share a little bit of feedback information that I got from this, but simply stating that this was my impression after the conference, that we do have the PhUSE mission, and I'm not going to bother reading this to you. You all know this, of course, but I just highlighted what I really thought was the essence of what happened here at this computational science seminar. It was a non-competitive atmosphere. We had academia, we had regulators, industry, technology providers all come together and discuss these common challenges. And it was such an amazing experience to see that this really happened. So this was a slide from my closing address. We had to have a quote, and I really thought that since, well, Darwin is my role model, I'm a biologist by education, and I really thought this quote just fitted so well into what we're trying to accomplish, working all together in this non-competitive environment. We're trying to adapt and evolve and stay afloat in this dynamic environment, and we're doing that by collaboration. So of course this wouldn't have happened without our sponsors kindly supporting this event, and I just want to mention them very briefly, that this was truly amazing, that what they contributed and made sure happened. I'm not showing what I really want to show you here, which is all my quotes. So hold on a second. It's here. Something happened with my slides. I hope you can see it. So let me just see if I can make this a little better for you, because truly this is feedback from the people that attended and were part of this conference overall. I'm sorry that this happened to the slides. Okay, so I could profit a lot and meet many interesting and dedicated people. There was a sense of camaraderie between everyone, as we all have a shared difficult objective. There were valuable insights from regulatory authorities. It was a good mix of people listening quietly and discussing actively, and most importantly, at least, we socialized a lot of PhUSE deliverables as part of this conference. So it was just overall a very positive experience. We had approximately 65 people at the conference itself, so it was an intimate conference, but at the same time, a good attendance within the 3 working groups that enabled us to do a lot of work. And with that, I think that's what I had to you for highlights from the conference chairs. And I will send on the microphone to Lukasz, who will talk to you about the data transparency.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to go through what we discussed, what we achieved during our meeting. Let me just make sure that everything is as it should be. Okay, so first of all, I'm stepping in here for Jean-Marc, who is the lead of the Data Transparency Working Group. He wasn't able to join us today, so I'll present the slides as hopefully as well as he would. We had over 20 participants in our group, from industry, from academia, from vendors, and quite importantly, we had 3 EMA representatives, which was quite a change to our typical meetings where we discuss things without the immediate feedback from EMA. Having them in our meeting and for the duration of the meeting for both 2 days was extremely valuable, as we were able to exchange our experiences, exchange our views of certain problems and solutions to those problems. It was absolutely very valuable, and I will show you in my last slide when we collected feedback. Having EMA in our group was one of the feedback that came again and again So our objectives during those 2 days were to mainly discuss and progress the work on the blog on EMA Policy 70, anonymization guides. So this was the spine of our discussions, but obviously data transparency is wider than just EMA Policy 70. We were able to focus on Policy 70, but also veered off to other aspects of data transparency. As you can see, there are 4 main topics that we wanted to go through, and we managed to do exactly that. We initially also wanted to discuss one of our deliverables that is imminent, which is ADAM-D identification standards. However, based on the comments that we have on this document so far, we decided that our time would be better spent focusing on the other 4 points, and we are going to finalize the ADAM-D identification standards document in the next few weeks in our telephone meetings. So there were 5 sessions. We all had 5 sessions, and our sessions went as follows. First of all, we started with a presentation from EMA. They kindly agreed to present their views and findings on how Policy 70 is going so far. For those of you who aren't that familiar, EMA Policy 70 is all about releasing clinical study reports to public domain within European Union. So every CSR that is submitted will eventually be also resubmitted to public domain, be it with special provisions for patient level information and so on. So we will redact it and make sure that subject identity is protected. And that's roughly what Policy 70 tries to address. So they shared their views so far. They discussed the target audience that they have in mind when talking about Policy 70, went briefly through the headlines, let's say, of the 24 reports so far released. Just for those of you who are interested, currently EMA has a backlog of 207 products, so there's a lot of work for EMA as well as all the sponsors who will be involved in producing those reports. There is a technical anonymization group that EMA is putting together, and they are hoping to finalize the list of participants in the next few weeks, with first meeting to be planned for autumn 2017. And also EMA will release an annual report by the end of this year and publish it in early next year, just to explain how things are going from their perspective. This was a really good start to our discussions because it did touch upon all those different topics that we were discussing later. We then moved on to our own review of published CSRs under Policy 70. We had a really good breakout session to discuss different criteria that we would like to use when reviewing those reports. The goal of this review is to have a working document that will be available on either a blog or a wiki website. We have to decide exactly how we're going to publish it, where anyone will be able to go in and browse through those high-level reviews of anonymization reports. This will hopefully make it easier to see how other vendors dealt with similar problems that we had, and so on. So this was our second session. We then carried on to discuss data utility. Data utility is a very tricky topic in data transparency because there is a great pressure to allow the greatest data utility possible, but obviously the greater data utility, the more chances there are for subjects to be re-identified, which is obviously what we're avoiding in the whole exercise. So we had another breakout session and talked about intended recipients of publicly released CSRs, and also about potential attackers, so people who we are not too happy to share with, but obviously since it is in public domain, everyone has access to that, and it's specifically those people that we have to make sure that we put all the security in place so that they don't take advantage of the information in the CSRs. We also had a very interesting presentation on how academic research is using CSRs for their purposes. So this was session 3. We then had an extra session in the evening where we all met for a fantastic meal. The food was truly astonishing, and it was a really good break between the 2 very busy days. So we reconvened on Tuesday and carried on our discussions on data utility. We wanted to come up with some sort of levels of assessing data utility. We had some initial starting points for the discussion, and we managed to take them sort of to another level. There were some really interesting ideas. Initially, there were kind of 6 levels of data utility. That was our starting point, and we wanted to assess utility of aggregated data in the reports of patient listings and narratives. We very quickly agreed that putting them all into one bucket is never going to work. Instead, we will require a kind of matrix approach where each of those 3 elements will have to be assessed separately, because in the very same document, aggregated data might have a really good data utility while narratives are completely redacted. So we started the discussion on the matrix assessment and also added a few elements to the whole picture as well. We also discussed a draft paper that our group is working on handling of narratives in the context of public release. We talked about anonymizing narratives retrospectively for those reports that have been released already, but also thinking ahead how we can change our processes to allow for easier and more transparent release of narratives, to avoid full reduction, but rather release as much information as possible while still retaining, obviously, those subjects' identity protection. And we definitely discussed that this is a topic that we need to drive forward, and hopefully we will have some more to discuss when we meet again, ideally in Edinburgh. Our last session was on risk determination, another breakout session. We talked about different populations that need to be used for measuring the risk. We talked about gaps in our understanding and not so much understanding, but in our definitions of risk measurement and so on. And the last comment is true not just for this session, but for all of them. Those things don't just apply to Policy 70, but to all data sharing initiatives and scenarios. So like I said at the beginning, as just before everybody went on their merry way, we asked each participant to have their first thing that came to mind when thinking about our 2 days, and having EMA was one of the great points that many people mentioned. Outstanding feedback to breakout sessions. We did split those discussions into breakout sessions, so into smaller groups, so that engagement was much better, rather than relying on the whole room to chip in, where discussions would probably be much harder. We split the room into 4 smaller groups where everybody was invited to share their opinions, however experienced they were in the field of data sharing and data transparency. It was a really good way of conducting those discussions, and we obviously at the end of each session shared our findings. What was also highlighted was a really good preparation of material and agenda, and this is purely thanks to Jean-Marc, who spent a lot of time and effort preparing everything, making sure that there was a lot of pre-read so that we came prepared. We had things to discuss directly rather than trying to figure out, you know, how best to spend those 2 days. We talked about the future. Everybody learned a lot, so it was truly a great meeting, 2 days where everybody had a chance to share what they know already, learn new things, and contribute to the overall picture of data transparency, and not just that. And that is it from me. I should pass on to Chris now, so hopefully this will work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lukasz. I'm just trying, there we go. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. So I'm Chris Price, and I led the Optimizing Data Standards Working Group sessions at the EU CSS, and we particularly focused on the project that relates to SDTM and ADAM implementation frequently asked questions over all of our 5 sessions. So for those of you who might not be aware of what this project involves, it's really focusing on understanding those nuances that exist across SDTM and ADAM, in that they provide a really great framework for data standards, but there are certain things open to interpretation, and that's where we try and fill the gap here from an implementation perspective. And what deliverables of the project are including are a process which users can submit questions and see the previously answered questions. And the team also works within a teamwork site as well to get those answered. So the project's already set up the question form that comes out of the PhUSE wiki. You can access that directly from the PhUSE website, and some questions have been answered already, and they will be published in the near future. So what did we actually do at the EU CSS? So we discussed the CDS 2017-2018 roadmap. We're very lucky that Peter van Roosel was in attendance, and he presented on behalf of Barry Nelson what CDISC is planning to do over the next couple of years. So we had some good discussions around that and where we might fit some of these questions into that. We then sort of broke out into sort of smaller sub-teams, similar to the data transparency group, rather than sitting around the table for 2 days. And there we sort of documented and categorized over 25 SDTM and ADAM implementation issues across all the different sub-teams that this project's broken into. So that's looking at validation, it's looking at data submission questions, legacy transformation, TA user guides, ADAM and SDTM nuances themselves, and trial design domains. So we sort of documented a whole load of those, so they'll also go back to the team to start developing more answers for those. We also obviously started putting together our thoughts on what the answers to those might be. And then there were also a number of additional questions that had already been submitted, either through the web form or at other conferences, and we started providing some individual perspectives on those to feed back to the project team to collate into answers that can be published. As Gitte alluded to, Crystal Allard was in attendance on the conference, and we are very lucky that she was able to join us for most of our sessions, particularly on the Tuesday morning, where she was able to share actually how the FDA make use of standardized study data and what they actually put that in terms of any reports they generate for reviewers from a CDA perspective. We then also were able to dive into some of the issues that have been seen at FDA, or findings more accurately, and sort of discuss those as a group and sort of think about what the root causes of those might be. So I think that was particularly enlightening to understand the different perspectives on both sides regarding those. We did actually sort of hit a few particular areas of interest, so things that cropped up in particular were some of the business and validation rules and consistency across health authorities and the CDIS published rules. We had some good discussion around the use of custom domains versus supplemental qualifiers and the findings about domain. So we were able to put together a fairly strong answer sourcing the implementation guide in particular in advising which to use there. One that sort of cropped up a lot also was around the trial design domains, and really in particular around those more innovative studies, so looking at studies, maybe adaptive designs or dose finding studies where we may be talking about infinite arms potentially at the design phase, but then retrospectively obviously being limited. And then lastly, what cropped up a lot was the challenges in adoption for control terminology and the impact this has on regulators and sponsors, so dealing with the quarterly release cycle and then actually making sure that that matches what was collected on CRF is then reflected within the data that's submitted, but also trying to maintain consistency across all of the studies within a submission as well, and all the studies sitting in Janus as well, and how we stack those together. So yeah, it was a really interesting couple of days, and we had some really great engagement from everybody in the room. There's about 20 of us in there, so I think the real call here is to really encourage those attending and those not attending to continue to contribute to these projects as they move forward. As the more contributions we have, the more of a common consensus we have around some of these nuances. So on that note, I think I hand over to Jaeger. Yeah.
So thank you, Chris. I'm Jaga, and I led the non-clinical topics group at the PhUSE meeting in London, together with the support of PhilDrew. For those of you who might not be that familiar, the main objective of the working group is to improve non-clinical assessment and regulatory science by identifying key needs and challenges in the field. Essentially, what we do is mainly focused around the implementation of SEND, and we work on setting up a strong framework for the implementation of SEND across industry, spanning across sponsor companies, CROs, as well as vendors. During this EU meeting, our main aim was essentially, as Gitte had already mentioned, data information sharing. We were looking to bring our EU colleagues on board with more information from what had occurred in the US PhUSE meetings, as well as understanding better where the European sponsor companies are in their implementation and sharing knowledge, essentially. So as the other work streams, we also had 5 sessions, and the 5 sessions are briefly outlined here. Starting from the left top, we had sessions on the regulatory use of SEND data. This was a session where we discussed how the SEND data that is being implemented and being sent to the FDA is currently being used by FDA reviewers in their daily work, and how it's supporting them in finalizing the reviews. And we also here discussed the results of the Fit for Use pilot, which was essentially one of its kind, where we had an open collaboration between the FDA, CDISC, and the PhUSE team. 13 sponsors sent their SEND datasets to the FDA, and it was reviewed by FDA reviewers, and they gave very intensive feedback. And this feedback was then shared in an open manner with the rest of the PhUSE community. And this was a very helpful exercise, and it's an exercise that a lot of the non-clinical people are still referring to and learning from. We then proceeded to talk about SEND visualization and data review. This was a very interesting working session with a lot of our vendors providing us with an idea of where they see data visualization for SEND datasets going, what is their vision, and what are the tools that they're using to achieve this. We had a keynote speaker in our third session, and that was Lilian Rosario, who is the Director of Office of Computational Sciences at the FDA. And Lilian gave a great presentation on where she sees the SEND implementation supporting the FDA and the workflows at the FDA. And she was also similarly pointing out a lot of the work that was done by the PhUSE working groups and the direct output from these working groups and how they've supported the FDA as well as the sponsor companies. Moving on, we had a session from colleagues in the industry presenting their challenges on the various aspects of the SEND implementation, be it authoring the NSDRG document or putting together a defined XML file. They presented how far they have come, what are the challenges they faced, and this opened up for a lot of discussions. We then closed with the session with discussing EU hot topic, which for us was the collaboration between IMI and that is the NextGets, which I will talk about briefly in a bit. But one thing I'd like to highlight is that there were main key themes that were popping up, and it was interesting to see how we as an industry have matured in how we view SEND. If you look at sessions from a year ago, there was a lot of discussion on how do we implement SEND and what is the technical issues around implementation of SEND. But this time around, we've gone past the technical implementation of SEND, and we're now asking questions such as, okay, now we have SEND, and then what? How do we use this data? How do we make this data fit for use? What does it mean when we call data fit for use? And so there were a lot of interesting discussions on conformance versus reviewability and understanding how can SEND data be useful not just for FDA for regulatory purposes, but also for industry and for colleagues to further their research. Another main theme that came up a lot was the point of making voluntary and pilot submissions to the FDA. As Crystal Allard mentioned during her keynote speech, they had received one SEND submission this year, and so the FDA is really looking for more submissions to come in from the industry. And a couple of colleagues from sponsor companies who are keen on doing such an exercise this year were openly talking about their efforts and encouraging other colleagues to go down this road. And the benefits are essentially, it's not just that you get feedback from FDA, but you also are supporting the FDA in their workflow optimization and in understanding how they can better use SEND to support their analysis. And so this was a topic that we talked about and that we heavily encouraged one another to engage in. As I mentioned, the visualization topic was an interesting topic, and there was a lot of presentations also from work done within the PhUSE working group on using what we might call the next step in visualization, interactive graphic objects, Krona plots to do visualizations of histology. These were all extremely interesting, and it's really looking, we're now, like I said, going beyond the implementation and beyond the regulatory use of data and looking at really how can we now further harness the power of these large data sets that we will soon be starting together. And industry best practices was a key theme. As I've mentioned, colleagues presented on the SDRG and the SDSP how their experiences have been, and it was a very open collaboration, non-competitive, so everyone was, let's say, relaxed. And We then also went on to learn about the IMI 2 projects. That's an European consortium, to understand what is the kind of work that's being done there and how they are also having key deliverables revolving SEND in their work packages. So we did, one of the key things that I'd like to do here is highlight that we did not come up with any new working groups. We did not define any new working groups, but we would really encourage, and we would continue to encourage everyone to look at the existing working groups. The non-clinical topics group has always been a very productive one, and there are up to 9 separate working groups within, working on various topics, so implementation topics, data visualization, etc. If you navigate to the CSS working groups website, the PhUSE Wiki website, you will be able to see all the different working groups, and you can see who are the co-leads, and you can contact them directly to participate. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I think I will now pass this on to Mike.
Good day. My name is Mike Wasko. I am here to just primarily introduce a new project from the PhUSE Non-Clinical Topics Working Group. This project is a follow-up to the biomarkers project, which, as Jaeger just mentioned before, for the past 2 years, I was a co-lead with Deborah Osman for a modeling endpoints working group for how to model biomarkers, where we created a white paper which was very well received in regards to the topic of biomarkers, and the group decided that it would be beneficial for a follow-up project to prepare some recommendations for how to deal with anti-drug antibody data in the non-clinical studies. This is a new project that was initiated at the 2017 PhUSE CSS in Springhouse. I am a co-lead with Gretchen Dean as well as Thomas Gabe, and unfortunately I'm not very well at pronouncing his last name. So we have identified a challenge and a need for this project, as ADA, or anti-drug antibody, is a parameter that more and more organizations are evaluating. The current SEND-IG version 3.0 does not really provide sufficient guidance or modeling of ADA. However, everybody would like to submit this data. SEND-IG 3.1 does allow some more flexibility than SEND 3.0 in allowing the use of SDTM domains. However, this SEND 3.1 still does not really specifically model ADA. So that is the current desire and need challenge that we need to address. So the scope of the team and the goals are multiple. One, we would like to provide some recommendations for how to model ADA in 3.0 and 3.1, whether that be variables, best practices, and these are obviously recommendations. This also includes proposing some possible solutions that this may have an impact for visualization tools. This may have an impact on future SEND-IG guidances. Another aspect is it has become quite apparent that nobody wants separate practices for clinical and non-clinical. So part of this group's goal too will be to investigate how clinical is doing this as well, and perhaps our recommendations could really be in line with each other. Yes, SEND and SDTM are similar yet different, and trying to find a best practice that will suit everybody is strictly the ideal. Part of this process as well will investigate not only encompassing what clinical is doing for SDTM, but also other organizations that there's a lot of crisscrossing of responsibilities and information in these areas. This is not limited to, but includes the LB testing from CDISC, the PP and PC projects at CDISC, as well as the PhUSE PP and PC project, because these also offer new methods and best methods to introduce what's going on, so that hopefully this can be more standardized and also looking at more the big picture, because we all know part of the joy of data is there's always new ways of using it and new implementations of these types of information. So we always have to look further downstream what could possibly be. Part of starting off any project is we have to identify what types of people are impacted and that we are looking for volunteers for. And that's what this presentation really is a call for participation. So far, the leads we've identified that we really need people to be involved in this project who are SEND business integrators. Obviously, software vendors and service vendors would be key, because this industry, as we all know, is very software and service based between CROs, LIMS vendors, data visualization vendors, analysis vendors. In terms of the scientific impact, toxicology scientists and other subject matter experts in terms of ADA would be greatly appreciated if they could participate. Not only sponsors, however, CROs and bioanalytical labs would be beneficial, since they are often the ones contracted to provide this information. Plus, it would be beneficial to them as well as the sponsors to have a unanimous methodology for representing ADA, since ultimately everybody's end goal is being able to submit all your data in SEND data sets. We are hoping that we will have some FDA representation, whether it be somebody from the Office of Computational Sciences or reviewers, to see how would they really see and prefer ADA to be modeled in SEND and visualized, how they would use it, because part of any consideration for these best methods is truly the analysis perspective of it. And honestly, the SEND core team from CDISC participation would be great as well, because this would allow an avenue for the information and recommendations and possible hurdles to also be communicated back to the SEND core team, and it may help impact or influence improvements in future SEND implementation guides. Currently, the status of the project is that the project has already been approved by the PhUSE Steering Committee, so we already have a green light, as I mentioned at the introduction of this presentation. The co-leads have been identified. We have via the PhUSE wikis, as well as the email blast, a call of participation has been placed asking for participants and volunteers. A wiki page has already been started and initiated, so people know how to find us and can join us and contact the leads, and there we also will be providing updates, minutes, etc. To date, we already have 12 volunteers, which is very impressive, as this seems to be a very anticipated topic, as in a little over a week's time from the call for participants email blast, we already have 12 volunteers, which is very reassuring, as often in some of these projects it is not easy to get many volunteers. Should you be interested in joining the project, there are multiple ways you can get involved and join the team. Option one would be to contact one of the leads. As I mentioned before, that is myself, Michael Wasko, Gretchen Dean, or Thomas. Our email addresses are on this slide, so as well as they will be published, the slides, on the PhUSE wiki, so anybody can also have access to them. Additionally, we already have a wiki page already up and running with our information as well. Currently, we are planning on having bi-weekly meetings that will occur in the morning to allow for participation not only from the US, but as well as from Europe. Especially Thomas, one of the co-leads, actually is based in Europe, so this especially helps us guide to have earlier in the day meetings in terms of my day, I should say, as I am located in the US. and allow for European participation in such a project. Once somebody joins the team, they will receive the contact information. Additionally, a poll is still going on, and the wiki page will be set up as the poll is to identify a meeting time when a good poll has been sent out. And thank you. That is the conclusion of the call for participation for the anti-drug antibody team project from the non-clinical topics workstream.
Thank you, Mike. So this is Gitte speaking again. Jane, if you are talking, we can't hear you. I just wanted to catch the ball before it passes on and say I wanted to extend a thank you to Pinnacle 21 for stepping in last minute and filling in an otherwise very busy agenda on the non-clinical working group and providing an overview of the integration of the new FDA business and validation rules. So that was also extremely useful information that was last minute introduced in the non-clinical working stream.
Hi, Gitte. Also, just to say, we've had a couple of questions which I've put in the chat window. I think Jaga was going to answer one and Chris the other.
Yep, so yeah, maybe I'll take the first one. So the first question was, is there any EU presence, and how EU see CSS standards, any EU regulatory requirements on standards? Obviously, I can't speak on behalf of the EMA, and I won't attempt to, but as luck would have it, one of the questions that had been submitted and answered in the data submission stream, which will be published shortly, is actually relating to data standards being mandatory for data submission, and how does this differ across different regulatory agencies. So as many will know, the EMA doesn't currently request subject level data on a routine basis on that side, and so there is the Clinical Trial Advisory Group on Clinical Trial Data Formats, or CTAG2, that is working on advising EMA on clinical data formats, which is leaning towards CSS standards, although it does accept that it would follow a similar progression as the FDA with a 2 to 3 year pilot. They provided recommendations to the EMA to use CSS and defined XML, and that was in April 2013 on that side. So there is no involvement of the EMA at this stage on that, for that piece, for the reason that they're not currently routinely requesting data sets, but there is the potential scope to extend to that in the future as and when they potentially move forward on that side.
Thanks, Chris. And Jaga, are you able to answer the other question?
Yep, so I'll just repeat it here. It says, does FDA indicate send is part of NDA submission or just for IND submission? So, so this is a good time to clarify this topic. Currently, we are in the compliance period for NDA, ANDA, and BLAs. So studies that started after 16th of December 2016, when they are going into an NDA, ANDA, or BLA submission currently, they have to include send datasets. Studies that start after 16th of December 2017, so that's December this year, when these studies go into an IND submission, they will then have to be included, as the send datasets will be then have to be included.
Okay, thank you very much. There aren't any more questions, so thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you very much to all the co-leads for presenting the content of the CSS.